Today is January 5th, 2020, and this is episode 213 of At Percussion. I'm Carly Vigna, and with me today are co-hosts Ben Charles.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Ben, and Casey Cangelosi.
Hey, everybody.
Casey, I think you're just coming back from Minnesota. What were you doing up there?
It's called the Minnesota Percussion Association, which is now affiliated with the Minnesota PAS chapter, and yeah, just like a big percussion event, mostly drumline related stuff, which I wish I had time to see some clinics because I always need a refresher on that sort of thing. But 700 plus students, and just like like huge, really healthy, well-oiled thing they've been doing for a very long time. I was talking to them actually, like, we got to get a bunch of you all on the board of directors and the treasurer and the president of this thing, and just say, like, will you please tell everyone how to put this type of thing together, because we hear it all the time. Like, people try to do it, but they either can't keep it going year after year, or they just can't get enough traction, or they just can't sustain it. So anyway, yeah, I mean, thanks to them, Casey, and congratulations on what a big event. Yeah, Ben?
Is that similar at all to the, I think it's Missouri one that I think you've done before, like the Carol Helbel thing?
It's a little different. Carol's, she does the big competition, but that one's really, I could say the same thing about that. Yeah, Carol's is certainly not 700 kids, but it's really great. I mean, it's great for a whole set of different reasons and kind of serves a different purpose. But yeah, performance clinics, masterclass, and competition at hers. But you could say the same thing. Like, she's really done an amazing job making it grow and having it be such a big thing in her area.
It's so great to hear about those things going well and being really well run, well organized, well attended. Cool.
Oh yeah.
Well, Ben, how's your 2020 going so far?
It's going really well. I was actually kind of like inspired, I think, by some stuff Carly said in the past, where since it was the end of a decade, I actually made a list of things I've accomplished in the past 10 years and in the past year. And then I made a list of things I plan to accomplish in the next year and plan to accomplish in the next 10 years. So it's kind of a fun activity. And Carly's talked about goal setting before. But I wanted to share a little quote, maybe to kind of get us started today, from my favorite musician on the planet, Jacob Collier. I thought it was just a wonderful thing for any creative type to hear going into a new year. He says, "This 2020, create whatever you want, however you want, with whomever you want. Learn as much as you can, map out your world, muck around with your skills, be loving, give it all away." So I thought that was pretty cool.
Good call.
Yeah. Nice thoughts. Thanks, Ben.
Well, and I'm sorry, Carly. I was just going to say real quick, we're releasing on January 23rd, and statistically speaking, this is right when everyone is failing at their New Year's goals. So also keep in mind, this is when it usually goes backwards. Yeah.
Statistically speaking, we are releasing this episode on my birthday.
Whoa.
So
Happy birthday,
Ben.
To
this, I will be 33 years old at least, or maybe older than that if you're listening many years in the future.
Happy birthday.
I hope that's in our history later on this day. Well, without further ado, our guest today is Matthew Duvall. Matthew is co-founder, artistic director, and percussionist of the esteemed chamber music ensemble 8th Blackbird. He's also the founder and owner of Unexpected Outcomes and the winner of many prestigious awards, including 4 Grammys, the MacArthur Award for Creative and Effective Institutions, Musical America Ensemble of the Year, and the Chamber Music America Visionary Award. He has held ensemble and residence positions at the Curtis Institute of Music, the University of Chicago, University of Richmond, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. Welcome to the show, Matthew. It's so great to have you on.
Hello, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thanks so much. Well, we were just talking about this a little bit before officially starting. Would you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with 8th Blackbird as an ensemble in residence at University of Richmond and other schools?
Yeah, sure. Well, ensemble in residence, lots of we get lots of questions at 8th Blackbird about how to be an ensemble in residence someplace and what that means, and it really means whatever the institution wants to call it. One of the maybe a stereotypical, if that's the right word, model is an outside ensemble that comes in and maybe twice a year, and they do coachings and a concert. And they're really a flagship promotional vehicle for the institution, and that's wonderful and fine. But we've done ensemble and residence positions. We did, as you mentioned, a 3-year program at the Curtis Institute, where we were deeply invested in the curriculum, doing play a lot of side-by-sides with the students, a lot of performing ourselves with the students, including building projects. And then the University of Richmond, which you asked about, which is another wonderful example and a fairly unique example, I think. The University of Richmond isn't, it's not a performance program. It's not a conservatory aspiring to train professionals. They have a wonderful department of music, extremely lovely a program and facilities. And in addition, the Maudlin Center for the Arts is housed at the University of Richmond. This is the largest regional presenting organization south of Washington, D.C. And 8th Blackbird divides its time teaching and doing projects in conjunction with the Maudlin Center for the Arts and the Department of Music. And I like to think of our work there as a music appreciation on steroids. We believe very much that I don't like to talk at people. I like to roll up our sleeves and do things together. I feel like applied work accomplishes the best long-lasting impact. And so we've tried a lot of things at the University of Richmond over the years, and where we have really found a wonderful niche is creating large-scale interdisciplinary projects at the institution. And this is also a nice niche between other faculty positions where we can liaise between departments within the arts sector or across the university and the academics in ways that the current faculty, they have job descriptions, they have course loads, and they're grading and teaching. And managing all other projects is beyond any normal person's capacity. But we can come in and we can spend time setting up those kinds of projects and creating larger experiences that are geared toward mass participation, the students being involved directly and not just coming to observe.
I had a sort of follow-up question to that. I think you're only the second podcast guest we've ever had, that the other one being Jason Haheim of the Metropolitan Opera, that has like a very obviously strong musical foundation, but then has this other half completely sort of unrelated. And when I read your bio, it said you had also completed studies in classical civilization, art history, and religion. And you mentioned cross-disciplinary stuff. Do your studies in those areas play into that at all?
No, not really, not directly. I went to college. I only applied to humanities programs when I was applying for college, and at the top of my list were Ithaca and Oberlin, because they also had very strong conservatory or school of music. And I got into Ithaca. And I got waitlisted at Oberlin, but ultimately decided on Oberlin. I got into the college, but I got waitlisted in the conservatory. And I thought, well, even if I'm just a minor or take a lesson or something, it'll still be cool. And I like Oberlin, so I went there. And then Michael Rosen, who is still, of course, teaching there, called me maybe at the end of the spring or early summer and said, well, we have a spot in the studio, and I'd like to invite you to be a major, but you're behind and you're going to have to work really hard. So I don't know. What do you think, kid? Because he calls everybody kid. And I said, okay. I was like, I'm in. Count me in. And I got there and I practiced like crazy. He taught me how to practice. I'd always just sort of goofed and played and participated, but never really understood what practicing meant. And but all along, I thought I was going to be an architect. I thought at the top of my list as a freshman or sophomore, and who knows where that was going to go. But that's what I thought when I entered college. And Oberlin doesn't have an architecture major, or didn't then, I don't know. But getting into classics was a way to get into the art history department and do a lot of study, and I liked the material. So so I finished a classical civilization major at Oberlin, and in the course of that, taking courses in other departments, also got minors in religion and art history. but and I'm grateful for that. I still I love the experience very much. But it was in my junior year when I had. I'm trying to. There's no short answers today, but I guess that's why we're here. I was probably in my junior year or something, and music that I had gotten involved in by that time in the conservatory was evolving to become the thing that I was way more interested in, and I started to become frustrated by writing essays and not practicing. So I did finish the college major gratefully, but about my junior or senior year, I really fully committed to trying to perform. Or just, I don't know if I really even thought about it as a profession, but it's definitely where I spent every minute I had.
Do you remember what you played for Mike Rosen for your audition?
Oh, Log Cabin Blues.
Yes.
I remember that because I played it too fast, and he sort of demonstrated how it could have a different feel, and he did a dance when he demonstrated. I remember the dance. That was funny, and I played. I remember that. I remember Log Cabin Blues. I don't remember what else. Probably, I don't know. I'm sure De La Cluse. I don't know.
Yep.
So you think I would remember? I mean, we work so hard on that stuff, but.
Yeah, sure. Carly, I think.
Yeah, well, getting back to the interdisciplinary kind of projects that you're doing, would you tell us maybe about one of them that's been particularly rewarding, or what type of interdisciplinary work you're doing?
Yeah. If I may, I'll give you two examples that have been really feel really good about. One, Eighth Blackbird has worked off and on with a jazz bassist and his combo in Chicago. His name is Matt Ullery, and he changes the names of his groups. I don't always follow, but anyway, he has a core trio that he works with. And Eighth Blackbird has recorded 2 albums with Matt Ullery and his trio. He has a wonderful body of work that is composed, but also really free. And there's room for the jazz musicians to really improvise. And it's beautiful to play. It's very beautiful music. And so we've recorded 2 albums with Matt Ullery. And he's so gracious as a player and a listener, and with his time. And so we've played some of his compositions elsewhere, and it occurred to us that he might be a great. It might be great to host him in a residency situation. So, at the University of Richmond, the lines between jazz and classical are still pretty traditionally drawn. And there had never been a project in the Department of Music where the students in the jazz curriculum had performed with the students in the chamber ensemble curriculum. And so we brought Matt Ullery in as a guest and expanded a number of his arrangements and did a concert that put all of these students together for the first time. And it was really successful and really rewarding, and I think a reasonable example of the kind of work that we do building a project that is outside what's existing in the curriculum, currently. So that was fun. And then another project that I'm working on a lot these days, something I'm really proud of, is a project I've built together with Matthew Bertner, who's a composer at the University of Virginia that I'm very close with and admire greatly. I'm a big, very deep fan of Matthew Bertner. He's a real inspiration for me. And a couple of years ago, I was asked to curate a couple of days of programming at the Ringling Museum in Sarasota, Florida. And they had a particular mandate for the curation. But in the course of doing that project, Matthew Bertner and I built a piece called Transient Landscapes. And when I say we built, really he composed and I did everything else, which is like figuring out, cutting pipes and planks and building all the setups and figuring out the technology side and running all the logistics. So what Transient Landscapes is we start with field recordings that Matthew Bertner has made in Alaska of a tidal glacier. And we recreate a tidal glacier in any space with a large contingent of volunteers and a wireless speaker network. So we did it for the first time in Sarasota, and we'll be doing it again in a month at the Interlochen Center for the Arts, and then a couple of times in Virginia in April. And we learned a lot from that first performance, and we're rebuilding the piece with some revisions. But I'm very excited. We'll be doing it in February. Interlochen, and what does making a glacier mean, right? Like what is that? So we start with a network, a sound cast of field recordings, and then Matthew has composed material on top of the field recordings. And so there's groups of players. There's a core group of percussionists, and they really are only the trained musicians that the piece requires, and it's not even learning licks or whatever. You just have to know how to hit things well. And they're playing a collection of pipes and planks and a couple of drums. We did it with 6 performers in Sarasota, but we're expanding to 18 to 20 in Interlochen, which I'm super excited about, because one of the things those players do with the large drums, they have a low drum, as many concert bass drums as we can find, and then something incredibly high like a jam block or a rim shot and a snare drum. And they realize calving events that happen in the recording, so that's pretty awesome. And then there's I have a couple of small swimming pools that we put out, and there's maybe a dozen people playing water chimes, and so I've cut all those be natural chimes. And then there's a contingent of volunteers who is walking back and forth of this large space. The space that we're planning for at Interlochen is about 300 feet by 100 feet, sort of an oval. And they walk back and forth in prescribed paths, playing wooden planks and making white noise with maybe a plastic bag or sandpaper. And so what they're doing is realizing the tide moving back and forth from the face of the glacier as the tide ebbs and flows. All of the ice that has been calving, large pieces but also really small pieces, collects at the base of the glacier, and it makes all of this sound. It sounds like this incredible bowl of Rice Krispies. And the tide pulls all that ice out, and then later in the day it pushes it all back in. And while it does that, it's making this cacophony of noise. One of the Matthew Bertner said to me at the early stages of this, when we were trying to think about what should we do, he said this quote that I'll never forget. He was trying to explain to me what it's like to record the glaciers, and he says people have this misconception that it's this silent, frozen wasteland, but glaciers are incredibly noisy animals. And I love how he described them as animals, and he talks about them as a species facing extinction, and that completely changed my perspective about these big blocks of ice. So we have those groups realizing the ice, the ebb and the flow tides, and then anybody who shows up. Oh, there's also a small group of like MIDI keyboard players playing drones. They're in the center station, and then anybody who shows up can use mobile devices to contribute to the field recordings, playback streaming files from a website, and it's all immersive. And the idea is that when you're standing inside this large flow of activity, that you hear the glacier performed around you. That's Transient Landscapes.
And so it's a big part of it. Like you said, the students will be walking, and they're going to be moving with white noise makers and these planks of wood. Is there any theater to it? Like I suppose I imagine them in motion. Can't help but think like, well, if you're going to do a glacier or tides, like is there something composed to walk or something? Well,
I mean, a choreographed element is a possibility, but the danger in these situations always is acting your job. And so dramatically, the first goal is to get everybody to just do the job and not walk in a way that is unnatural. I mean, and yes, there's a focus required. Obviously, if you're screwing around, you're not helping. But you're
can't horse around. Yeah.
But if you're taking it seriously and you're contributing meaningfully, then you understand that every time you pop that plank at your prescribed interval of 60 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever it might be, one of the definitions of glacial ice is that it has to contain these incredibly compressed pockets of air.
Uh-huh. And those pop out and make sound now and again, right?
That's part of the Rice Krispie noise I described before. That as these blocks of ice are melting, this air escapes and it creates popping noises, right? And when we were in Sarasota doing the premiere, and it wasn't like we set up, we did the thing, it was wonderful, but at the same time, the first time you do something, there's the whole list of things you want to do better next time, right? So, but even so, Matthew Bertner was standing in the middle, and I had never visited a glacier. I went to Alaska last summer, which was a different important trip. But at that time, I hadn't visited a glacier yet, and he was standing in the center, just listening, and he was really he was emotional, and he looked at me and he goes, I really hear it. It really sounds like the recordings. And he was, a sort of that moment when you're amazed that something actually kind of works, and wow, that really struck me, that moment when it was like, oh, we nearly got this,
It's fun to discover. I reported, gosh, I don't know, a long time ago on something called singing sand dunes. Do you all remember that? Ben, you might remember that. Okay, well, anyway.
Yeah, I do. I
was like, come on, I know. So they don't care. I do all this work. Nobody hears it. Yeah. It's just amazing. Like, put a mass of something, it's gonna make all these crazy sounds you would never expect. But yeah, of course, sand dunes. It made me think of that as well.
I'm writing that down, Casey.
Yeah. I think they call them singing sands. It's sort of like it's similar to a glacier. Of course, it all happens much, much faster, but it can be really, really loud. Like there's stories of famous explorers talking about the Sahara Desert, and they're hearing these what they call booming sands or singing sand dunes. And as the wind blows, you would think, it's the wind causing like a drag coefficient current going down and like making this humming sound, but it's actually just the sand falling and piling on itself. And actually, if you ever walk on a beach, you notice if you kick the sand just right, like dig your heel into it, you'll hear a little squeak. And that's the friction of the sand rubbing against itself. Yes, so you hear this little squeak. It's the same thing, just scaled up.
Wow.
It's okay. Cool. It's cool, and it's amazing. It can get really, really, really loud. So there's all these cool folklore stories, and people, of course, trying to explain it throughout the centuries. But now we know it's just boring science. Dang
it! Knowing too much, there's no mystery left. Stop.
I know. Yeah, now we know it's just friction. It's lame.
We have to wonder. No, stop. You're spilling all the secrets. Stop right now.
I know. Ben, sorry I interrupted you, but I made the guest laugh. You haven't made the guest laugh.
Well, looping back around.
I'm an easy audience. Don't get, that's like, Okay, go ahead, Ben.
To the 8th Blackbird for a second. We were talking earlier. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, where they have this residency, and I'm sort of ashamed to admit that I was like pretty late to the party of discovering 8th Blackbird. And actually, I didn't directly come across 8th Blackbird because I intended to. Steve Reich has this amazing piece called 2x5, and I got this recording of it by Bang on a Can. And also on that same recording is 8th Blackbird doing Steve Reich's double sextet. And that was actually like my gateway drug into the depths of 8th Blackbird fandom. But and it was like amazing to me to know that this Pulitzer Prize winning work by Steve Reich was premiered in my hometown, and I never knew about that. And it was written specifically for 8th Blackbird. So could you tell us about both working with Steve Reich on the composition, but also the recording?
Sure. Well, first of all, in addition to what you set up, Magdalen Center for the Arts at the University of Richmond is one of the co-commissioners, by the way. So that's an example of the kind of cool projects that we've done with the Magdalen in the past. Double Sextet was was a real gift, but it took a long time coming to fruition. So let's see. We bumped into Steve Reich off and on at festivals, and I don't know, over the years. I'm trying to remember. I don't really remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was a Music for 18 or something where we really got to know him. But after that, we started just pestering him occasionally. You've never written a piece for our instrumentation. You really want to write a piece for our instrumentation, don't you? Okay, well, see you next time. Oh, by the way, and we just, it took about 6 years to get onto his schedule. Weirdly, and I probably shouldn't get into numbers, but it is one of the most expensive projects we've done with a composer, which shouldn't come as a surprise.
Well, you said weirdly. I was like, that's not weird at all to me. That's what I would expect.
What you would expect. No, the weird part is that it is one of the easiest things we've ever raised the commissioning money for. That surprised us because we were like, oh, how are we ever going to do that? And then it was co-commissioned among 6 or 7 presenters, and those are the venues where we performed it in the first season in which he wrote the piece. So about half of that was his writing, and the other half was, I don't know, all like the parts and scores and all that stuff. But also, we really tried to get him, and this is one of the reasons it kind of took longer, but we finally gave in. Is we really tried to get him to write a piece for Sextet, for 6 of us, and he wouldn't write a piece for non-doubled instruments, So it had to be 2 sextets. We're like, okay, fine. So then you write the piece, but then you also have to record one of the sextets to play along with while you play the piece, sort of like, Electric Counterpoint or some of his other works. So we did that, and that was great. We paired it originally with a work called Singing in the Dead of Night that was written for us by Bang in a Can. Double Sextet was sort of the opener for that show, and we did that program for a season or a couple of seasons or something. But I'm trying to remember the. And Steve didn't think we could do it live for some reason, or he was skeptical or something. But the earliest instance I remember of doing it with 12 performers was at a residence, a short-term residency with Oberlin Conservatory, and there may have been others, but that's the earliest one that I recall. And man, it changed everything. We don't. It would take a lot to get us to play the piece with the recording now. Playing it live, the whole thing just explodes.
So was Mike
when you're
Harrison
hocketing back and forth?
Part?
So there's 2 identical sextets, and like a lot of his music, the partners, the 2 pianos and the 2 vibes. Really the piano percussion battery does just massive hocketing throughout the whole piece, and it's that back and forth, that energy and that interlocking that Steve loves, and that is the thing that you completely don't experience. You hear it, but you don't know which player is which with the recording. But when it's live, you see the transference of that material back and forth between the 2 players live and live performance, and it's totally electric. And then the strings and winds. There's some hocketing parts there too, but they also play these incredibly long, soaring lines over the hocketing, and that's hard in a completely different kind of way. But hearing that come from both, I don't know, just live, the piece is so many thousands of times better, and we will play it live anytime anybody wants to do it. But we don't prefer to play it with the recording any longer.
Are there any upcoming performances of that anywhere live?
Nope, not that I know of, not by us. Other people are playing the piece, and maybe live, but but I think there's performances with our recording out there somewhere. Yeah, but I love to do it, but it's been a while since we played. when we get hired to do anything that's collaborative, a year ago, September, if I'm remembering correctly, we did a show with San Francisco Symphony, and we did double sextet live with the principals, and that was a blast. And that's the most recent. But anytime we do collaborative work with a local ensemble or something, that a double sextet always comes up as a possibility. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, I was reading about your recent recording of Singing in the Dead of Night that you just mentioned. That's by Michael Gordon, David Lang, and Julia Wolf, which just sounds like an amazing work. I'm not familiar with it. I really look forward to the release later this spring.
Thanks.
I'm wondering, what was it like to revisit the piece more than 10 years after the first performance?
Yeah, right. So we played that off and on for a couple of seasons, and it was great. Excuse me. We commissioned Bang It Again, the three composers, David, Michael, and Julia, to write us a collaborative piece. And we weren't sure what that meant, but we really hoped that they would sort of get all up in each other's business. They didn't so much, but they still wrote us a great show. The pieces are fairly distinct. Let's see. I don't know, 10 years ago, that is when we first learned the piece and started playing it. And, oh, right. So for some reason, and I don't know, sometimes, I don't know, we never recorded it, which is really silly because we have a pretty consistent catalog. We learn things and we perform them. If we really like them, we record them pretty quickly and we move on. And for some reason, the sort of the mechanics of what label this was going to be on and how it was going to get funded, like whatever all the planets were that needed to align, it sort of just never happened, and it sat on the shelf for a number of years. And for some reason, I get probably because we're working with David Lang on a new project that will be premiering in the fall, but conversation about this came up again. And we're like, why did we never do that? We should do that. And we said, fine, let's figure out how to do it. So we came to an agreement with, because they're usually recorded on Cantaloupe and we record on CD, and it's going to be released on CD, but everybody's super cool and enthusiastic and awesome. And so we relearned just to record, and we plan to record it in a year, maybe. We're going to bring it back for a future season, but we really just relearned it to record. And so we didn't do everything the same that you do for live performance. I mean, mostly because there's lots of things you don't have to worry about. It was fully staged by a choreographer named Susan Marshall. And so there are a lot of things that we did in performance that were sort of ways to make transitions and move around the stage and or whatever. And then, of course, in the studio, you can make anything you want work. But it was really different coming back to it a decade later. And I do think that we play it better now, and I don't know what do I mean by that. I'm not even sure what I mean. I mean, the material, a lot of it made more sense to me this time. David's piece, he wrote us 3 movements, and those are pretty straightforward and felt good then, and they feel good now. Michael Gordon's piece is rambunctious and hilarious, and there's so much cacophony in it, random dropping these clangs of metals and these crazy riffs and licks, and I think we got that more this time. I think we were less afraid of the material. You know what was different about that is, in a way, we were less afraid of being perfect and more comfortable going for the gestures and not getting stuck on every little thing needing to be right. And that felt more freeing. And then Julia Wolf, we're going to program her piece next season, 2021. The Light of the Dark, it's called, and it is really epic with long, drawn out gestures and big sections. And I don't know that we really had the ability to stand back from all of that and see the whole thing before. But that piece made a lot more sense to us this time around, in my opinion.
So here's a Facebook question we have from Edward Choi, and Edward says, "Hi, Matthew. It's been too long. Congratulations on such a wonderful career. Would love to hear about your favorite performance highlights and perhaps even some not so good memories that you've learned from."
Wow. Okay. The first bad memory that pops into my head, like immediately. Okay. All right. Here's the thing. We talked so mellifluously about double sextet earlier, and I take none of that back. However, I underestimated the piece grossly, and the first performance ended not great. The premiere.
Was the composer there?
Was like, Reich is and whatever. I made it work. It's fine. You take cues and it all works out well. But Reich is extraordinary. Oh, Casey, you're doing that blurry background thing. I wondered about that.
Isn't that cool? And look, if I lean back just right, this gong will come into focus.
Look, you're like going into another dimension.
Yeah. No, it's cool the way it works because you can get. Oh, it was working so well last time. Yeah, look, I can rock the gong back and forth into focus.
Should we all do that? No, now we're just talking about that though. That's the problem. Okay, I gotta bring it, you guys. Okay, so the thing, Reich, Steve, is very unique in my opinion because I feel like he's one of very few composers. Well, in history, I don't know if that's too inflated, but certainly recently, who I feel has created his own performance practice. I feel like his music requires a kind of preparation and attention that is just utterly unique. And the two things that I teach now from experience is that practicing snippets, small parts, does not prepare you to play the whole thing, and you have to hear hear the large phrases and not think that counting the smaller groupings is knowing the part. Sure. There's probably more, but those are two prime things to keep in mind. And I did not fully appreciate those until I was in the trenches with this difficult work that we were playing for the first time. And so I learned an enormous amount from that project.
Seems like it's a good example of, playing this lick right here and now is very different than playing this lick after 4 minutes of experience. Being in this whole other musical world and
precisely. And you absolutely cannot cram it. It has to. You have to play it, and it's not about hours in a day. You have to play consistently for a long duration of time for it to really get into your muscles. Mm-hmm. Just cramming, forget it. It doesn't work. So I do not underestimate him anymore. I learned a lot about practicing from that whole piece. I mean, generally, but of course, certainly about his music specifically. But I really think it's a type of preparation that is unexpected. And if you have not played Reich's music before, it's very, very easy to get blindsided.
That's one thing he was talked about, like with his students. It's like, if you're going to go play a football game, like you can't just train the last week, no matter how hard you try. It's a long game. You gotta prepare and work on all sorts of skills for a long time, and things become automatic over time. They don't become automatic because you spent a lot of time on them.
Yeah, but we look at parts. So you look at you're assigned an etude or something, and at a certain point you can look at it and go, okay, I sort of know how long it's going to take me to learn that. You think, oh, how hard is it, right? Well, if you have 12 pages of Reich's music and you look at the first page and you see something repeating, you think, oh, I can play that, right? That it's just it's mercilessly deceptive.
I feel like it's on a different scale of what hard means, because if someone says, "Oh, Reich is really hard," you apply it to the old scale, like, "Oh, there must be more notes to learn," or I can't look at the page as long, or you try to
technical things.
Right,
well,
or
I mean,
something
like
exactly
my
like all those things are parameters within the first scale of hard, in quotations, hard, and Reich is like, it's hard for some different reasons.
One of my favorite like descriptions like this is was actually of David Lang's music,
Yeah.
and someone said like David Lang's music requires the technique of an absolute beginner. I mean, like it's eighth notes. It's not, but it's the sort of like cerebral complexity of it that's what makes it so just mind-warpingly difficult. I think.
Yeah.
And it's a fun thing about Reich. I remember being in high school listening to Come Out or Violin Phase or Piano Phase, and just actually listening to the whole thing, headphones start to finish, you kind of start to hallucinate, around like minute 10. And I started to think like, oh, there's like, wow, they faded in a new instrument. They must have. And then you go back the next day, fast forward to minute 12, and you don't hear it.
It's like you're in drumming, but what are they called? The resultant melodies, or like you hear these melodies that they're sort of there, like they're occurring, but they're not. No one's playing that melody,
Yeah, so trying to play and like keep your brain straight during all that, yeah, very.
Oh, wait, Edward asked about a really awesome experience.
Oh, great.
Oh, hi, Ed. By the way, I met Ed at Northwestern. We did master's work there.
Cool.
I met him during that time, but it has been many, many years, unfortunately.
Do you want history, Carly, or do you want to do another question?
Well, Matthew, did you want, because you talked about I guess the challenge of Reich, did you want to talk about a favorite performance highlight too?
Well, speaking of Jennifer Higdon premiering her concerto with the Atlanta Symphony was a crazy highlight. Well, number one, working with her is extraordinary. One of the things about Reich is there was very little back and forth, almost no back and forth during the creative process. He really plugs his commissions in to his schedule and creates his art. I mean, it is fully formed in his mind, and you just get it. And then we sent practice recordings back and forth a little bit. He was curious about, how some things were sounding, but it was already written at that point. It was just, he just wanted to be part of the rehearsal process a little bit. But Jennifer, there was a lovely, we're such close friends with her, and she wanted to know about our interests, and she knew us all as individuals, our personalities, and she thought about that as she was writing these. Everybody has an interlude of some sort or another during the course of the concerto, and so playing that piece feels very personally rewarding in a way that it's uniquely emotional in a different kind of way. And then the orchestras we worked with on that piece we've had so many wonderful experiences, but the first time you get in front of an orchestra with a new piece and you hear the orchestra part for the first time, it was like blew my hair back. It was awesome. So that's one really, really great memory.
That's so great. Thanks for telling us about that.
Sure.
Casey, I think you have some history for us.
Yeah, do y'all want to know what happened on release day today?
What happened?
Oh, good. Thank you, Matt. Good. Thank you.
I want to hear everything.
So every week I try to tell you
in 1987, Ben Charles was born.
Well, yeah, apparently this is Ben Charles' birthday. So yeah, January 23rd when we're releasing. Again, happy birthday there, buddy. But yeah, a couple other things definitely happened, and the one that kind of popped out the most interesting to me, because it relates a little bit. If you remember last week, we talked about Benny Goodman had they called it the coming out of jazz at Carnegie Hall, and it was met with great reception, like huge acclaim, slam dunk success for Benny Goodman, and also just for jazz at large, because he borrowed from so many different ensembles and all these different players that weren't just in his regular band. So it was really, really, really a big success. Not as good a success, unfortunately, 1943, and we've talked about Duke Ellington in these news segments a lot of times, always with really, really great things to say. But Duke Ellington plays at Carnegie Hall for the first time in 1943, and he premieres this piece that's being advertised as his first symphony. And this I had never heard of, but it's more like a symphonic suite. It's 3 movements titled Black, Brown, and Beige. And as Ellington puts it, this is supposed to be a parallel to the history of the American Negro, in quotes. That's how he said it. And a big concert in attendance: Eleanor Roosevelt, Count Basie, Frank Sinatra, Leopold Stokowski. And it's sort of a chronology of time, like the African American chronology up to this point. So the first movement, titled Black, is to represent the African American slave perspective, and then the second movement, Brown, is to represent freedom and the African American workforce and how the wars they fought alongside everyone else, all the work that they were doing. And then the final movement, Beige, is to represent the modern African American in Harlem, New York. So what else to say? Yeah, unfortunately, the reviews were not great, and Duke suffered a lot of criticism over the work and only ever performs it 2 more times in its entirety. And in his words, he says the script was far stronger than the music. So people have said that had he been more upfront about what the piece was about, maybe it would have done better at the premiere. So there's a cool little NPR article, real short, and a little interview. I don't know if you ever listened to Christian McBride, the bassist and composer and host of NPR's Jazz Night in America, but he talked about this piece a little bit, and the title of this little write-up is A Sprawling Blueprint for Protest Music, courtesy of the Jazz Duke. So something Christian McBride talks about is how this piece way back in 1943 kind of laid the foundation for future works of protest songs to come about and exist. And one of the pieces from Black, Brown, and Beige is kind of become a jazz standard, and it's called Come Sunday. And that was re-recorded in 1958 and spread around very well and was very popular. And right after that, Sonny Rollins recorded what's called the Freedom Suite in 1958, and Max Roach recorded We Insist, the Freedom Now Suite in 1960. So Christian McBride talks about how, this piece was the foundation for these other pieces. And he also says that the younger generation in the 60s are much more direct in their protest songs, whereas the Duke was much more metaphorical and hidden in his messages, which is a very, I think, symphonic thing to do. You don't put it up front so obviously. So I thought
also like a sign of the time sort of thing. Like I think that was probably just how people did things those days. It was pre-Vietnam War, so.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and they say like right from the get-go, just the fact that he came forward and said this is to parallel the African American experience, like already he was in hot water, like already, like even if it went amazing, the performance, he probably would have suffered some criticism just simply by the sheer nature of what I
think through the filter of that audience's perspective, he probably was probably perceived as very forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I did give it a listen, and it actually gave me a new thought about a lot of music, because I don't know about y'all, but I don't know if every style scales up or down with the same strength of the like regular force it has. For instance, like I don't know if rock and roll scales up to orchestra very, very well, the same way I'm not sure jazz combo scales up to full orchestra as well. So I don't know. It did make me think about that, and I was thinking, well, wait a minute. I think like I really enjoy Gershwin, and I think like a West Side Story really works. But then you listen to, small combo Duke Ellington or big band Duke Ellington, and it's very different, So I don't know. It did give me a new thought.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that is possible to scale jazz up. There's no question in my mind that it is. I don't know to what extent that's been attempted.
Right.
Jazz symphony. But I am sure that there's a successful genre there.
I think that I want to say maybe like 2 years ago, Wynton Marsalis wrote a symphony for New York Phil that was something along those lines.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I don't and even just say, like, let's set aside the moniker jazz for a second, but a marriage between composed and improvised performance, where is the conundrum for a work of this nature.
Yeah, maybe so.
But look at every music from fully composed to freely improvised is a range of form, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in that range is a sweet spot for a fully composed piece that allows freedom for an improvised element, which I feel like is one of the things that seems to me that is at the heart of what we call jazz.
Sure.
It's not all of it. It's not everything either.
Sure. And give it a listen. I did listen to it. I really enjoyed it. It is good. And yeah, it's called Black, Brown, and Beige. And if you're like me, you had never heard it. And I'm glad I listened to it. I'm glad I discovered all this.
And the materials that you were reading or researching, do we know when Black, Brown, and Beige has been performed recently? Has it had any recent performances?
I didn't find any.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I
found there was a recording on YouTube, however, so it must have been. I mean, long past these times. So
I think the reactions to it, the legacy pieces, like Sonny Rollins and Max Roach, that piece is fascinating too. I'm really glad to have heard about all that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, and in these same lines, also on January 23rd in 1970, Judy Collins, singer-songwriter, she is refused permission to sing a song in court. So if you've ever heard of the infamous Chicago 7 trial, which was this group in, I believe, the late 60s they got convicted or accused, I guess accused of conspiracy and causing riots, and it's all just protests related to the Vietnam War. And Judy Collins was going to sing a song in court, and it's kind of interesting. You can actually read her entire testimony between her, the court, and I guess 2 lawyers. But it's really interesting because it all comes down to this little statement she makes, where her lawyer says, "This song is not entertainment, Your Honor. This is a song of peace and what happens to young men and women during your wartime." So I don't know, it kind of struck a chord with me, that same thing we talk about all the time. Like, no, music and art's more than just entertainment. It's supposed to be this other thing. And there it was in a court case where they refused to listen to the song because they didn't think it was appropriate. And they're making the same exact point. The judge says, "I'm sorry, we're in court. We're not here to be entertained." Say, like, right, we're not trying to entertain you. That's not what this song is about. So I thought that was interesting. That also happened on, what are we on, January 23rd. So moving right along, these other ones are really short and just kind of fun to know. But if you know Carlos Chavez's Indian Symphony, cool piece with a lot of good percussion writing. I was lucky enough to play it when I was a student. That was premiered in 1936. And we have a few birth dates. We've got 1953, composer John Luther Adams. It's his birthday also. So Ben, I guess you have John Luther Adams' birthday.
Oh, yeah.
And you also have Mason Bates' birthday.
Very nice.
And you also have Django Reinhardt's birthday.
Cool.
There's 2 others that you missed.
Okay.
Well, you also have Samuel Barber's death, so take that.
So also January 23rd, Gary Burton and
Morris
Poulter. Yeah.
Oh, and Morris Poulter?
Yeah, birthday
I
buddies.
like it.
Nice.
Cool. Well, did you
guys read Gary Burton's memoir?
Yes, we actually talked about that.
Did you? I read that. I loved it.
Yeah, it's very good.
Anyway, love that guy.
I've been blown away just by what you've said about it on the show, Ben. Like, yeah, plenty of incentive to read it. So anyway, that's the news items I found for the release date.
Cool.
Well, Matt, we have one of our regular co-hosts could not be with us today. Ksenia is out. I think she's traveling from Serbia.
Okay.
But,
hi, anyway.
She sent along a little, a quote unquote, little question. And so
There's no
I wanted
questions here
to read that and hear what you had to say about it. So Ksenia said, I read that you enjoyed the script for Red by John Logan. Given that this work explores an artist's way of seeing and perceiving art through the prism of Rothko's struggle about being commissioned to paint a group of murals inside the Four Seasons, I was wondering what your thoughts are.
Hang on. You lost me at Red.
Oh, sorry. All right. I'll just start over.
Just start the question over. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Red. Got it.
So Ksenia says, I read that you enjoyed the script for Red by John Logan. Given that this work explores an artist's way of seeing and perceiving art through the prism of Rothko's struggle about being commissioned to paint a group of murals inside the Four Seasons, I was wondering what your thoughts are on the following quote. Where is the arbitration that separates what I like from what I respect, what I deem worthy, what has, listen to me now, significance? I was wondering if you could give your thoughts on whether likability and respectability in the creation and consumption of art are separated or united. That's like a DMA level question right there.
I said, Ben, you have to ask this because I don't know what the heck she's talking about. Red is a play for everybody.
Red is a play
about Rothko and his assistant, I think.
Yeah. I saw Red at the Goodman in Chicago. It's a favorite of mine. Isn't that funny? Ha. Coincidental. Okay. Let's see. A couple. I think that there's a couple of reactions. I think that there is a difference between likability and craft, to be sure. Across all genres of music, there's lots of things I don't like, but I respect enormously because I can recognize that they're done incredibly well. There's a really important distinction there between what is good, such a benign word, but I'll use it, good, versus to or not to my own preference, right? To dislike things because they're not to my preference, I think would, generally would be quite shallow, and I try to be careful about jumping to conclusions without thinking about why I'm forming the opinion that I am, that knee-jerk reaction that we all have, or gut reaction, I should say, before we've thought about something. We're either adverse to it or drawn to it. Yeah. You know what you remind me of, which is not, you remind me of a question that comes up a lot about the Grammys, actually, speaking of Grammys. So there's a lot of, it's often very contentious about, what does that mean to get a Grammy, because, well, there is so much incredible art making out there. How can you choose one to get an award? It's fairly preposterous. And artistically, I agree with that. But I've been around that whole thing, I think, enough to have realized that it's really an industry award, not an art award. And what I mean by that is that you have to make extraordinary creative product to be considered, I think, or you should have to do that. But beyond that, you also have to have that product has to be heard by people. And so there is very much a tree falling in the forest aspect to yes, we can make art, but then what do we do with it? And I think Grammys much more directly addresses the question of then what. So there is too much good work out there for all of it to be recognized, and I think what the Grammys tends to do, if handled correctly, and there's another conversation to be had about that, because it can be a popularity contest, and that piece is unfortunate. But but we are being successful as musicians requires more than just playing well, I guess, is the short version of a very long answer. There's a lot of self-management to get the work that we do in front of audiences. And so back to Red, I think there is a real struggle there for Rothko between making it art and having it as a commodity. And that is something that he struggles with in that play a lot. But I don't personally conclude that something being commercialized makes it inherently bad. I don't agree with that.
I had a quick little note to add since Matt mentioned the Grammys. Does anyone know someone that we are familiar with that presented the Beatles with a Grammy award?
I mean, email.
Gary
I
Burton.
don't know.
Gary Burton did. Yeah.
So full of Gary Burton facts today.
Yeah, well, we mentioned his bio,
That's
and
awesome.
it just made me think of it. But yeah, I was trying to look in the bio real quick, but I didn't quite find it in time. But it was something along the lines of like, I think Gary Burton won a Grammy award, and like for some reason, like because he was on stage, they just had him present the next one that happened to the Beatles or something like that.
Wow.
I think he's found himself in those situations for his entire life. Like, how did I get here? All right, let's do this. That's basically his whole life. I don't know. All right.
I want to say it was for Sgt. Pepper's, but yeah.
Cool. I was gonna ask Matt, do you know, like, because I think I understand what you're saying about the Grammys, like they have to look at it as art and then also have to consider its visibility and how much it's gotten out there. Do you have any idea how they do that? Do they look at sales? Do we know?
Yeah, well, I don't know, visibility. So what happens with the Grammys is that everybody, record labels, and any title can be put forward for nomination. So there's 2 rounds of voting. And the first round, say you have art, the category that we've been awarded Grammys in is, they changed the name of it over the years, but I think it's small chamber performance or something. It's like less people versus more people, like an orchestra or something. Anyway, so chamber performance, and then and that first round is literally like anybody who has released an album commercially. I don't know about self-released material. Like if I make an album in my basement and press 1,000 copies, can I submit that for a Grammy? I actually don't know the answer to that question, but any or commercially distributed album can be nominated, can be put forward to be nominated. So that first list, you get like 350 names or whatever. It's just massive. So how does anybody? So then anybody who is a voting member of the Grammys, and the way you get to be a voting member, you don't have to have a Grammy. It's like the requirements are maybe you have released an album on a label, and there's other things too, because there's lots of people in the industry. There's producers and engineers, not just recording artists. So there's different stipulations for how you become a member of the Recording Academy, and members vote on all of these things. And you're like, well, there's hundreds and hundreds of albums. How can you choose? So the goal of the first round of voting is to take those 350 and choose 5, and those become your nominations. And floating, your name floating to the top for people to recognize or vote, because in the final round of voting, it is really ideal. The Grammys, the Recording Academy has a really great limitation on voting. So in the final round of voting, you are not, I think they even limited it further. I'm going to say something, but I'm not sure it's right, but you'll get the idea. I think so there's 4 main categories, Song of the Year or whatever, the ones that you see on the telecast at night that everybody can vote for. But beyond that, you're limited. You're not allowed to vote in more than 10 categories, I think. That's because they recognize that nobody can listen to all of that material responsibly to make an informed decision
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're voting in more categories than that, you're just guessing, or it's a popularity contest, and that's what they're trying to minimize. And these are good restrictions. So I can't remember how I got off on that, but so you have these 350 and you whittle it down to 5, and to get from that 350 to the 5, I think you have to have done enough or enough performances, or sold enough units. For people
one way or another.
Say, oh, I heard that album, or I know that they're doing a lot of work and they're doing good work, and I went to their concert and I liked it, or whatever. But somehow it's honestly, it's really, how do you choose 5 from that 350? That's a crazy thing. And if people aren't drawn to check your thing out because they heard something from somebody, or they saw a review in a magazine, or they heard something on the radio, or whatever it might be, nobody can listen to all that content, right? It's impossible. So I think that's the piece of it that is more about professional, I don't know, self-administrational success, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Yeah. But then once you get it narrowed down to 5, generally, in my experience, when I've reviewed for the final round of votings, I've reviewed those 5. They're all good. Like, but people, in my experience, are not successfully nominating albums that shouldn't be nominated. Now, there's other ones that should have been nominated too. Like, there's a lot of music that is good enough to get a Grammy. Jesus, But at least I don't think that there's undeserving material filtering through. So that for the most part is good, and I'm sure there's always exceptions, and it really is important to listen before you vote. That should go without saying, or you shouldn't, just guess or vote for your buddy, although people do that. So,
can you describe the feeling of receiving that first Grammy Award versus the feeling of the fourth?
Yeah. Well, the first one was funny because we were in a contract, a residency contract that we could not get out of to go to the Grammys. So I was in Pittsburgh, and I was doing a performance with some percussionists at Duquesne University. And at the conclusion of the performance, I got a thumbs up from the violinist in the ensemble, Matt Albert at the time, saying that we had won the Grammy. And I was like, great, that's awesome and really weird. And I was sort of disbelieved. But I was in a percussion ensemble concert at Duquesne University and nowhere near the Grammys that year. And so it was very abstract. And then we went and we watched the telecast in the hotel bar. And so that was cool. But it all seemed very far away and unreal. But then nobody gets a Grammy at the Grammys. You go there and they give you fake Grammys. And then 6 or 8 months later, you get a Grammy in the mail. That was really weird. That was weirder. Because it did seem like, is this really happening or whatever? And then, so that's how that sort of unfolded. And then the fourth time was super fun. I guess I admit that the fourth time you're less concerned about winning. It's just awesome
Sure.
Going to the Grammys is really fun. It just is ridiculous and super fun. And most of the people who go there don't get Grammys. It's just an amazing hang where it's me sitting next to the guy who's up for, his Zydeco album is up in some category. And I'm like, hey, Zydeco guy. And he's like, hey, chamber music guy. And we hang out and they call out all the awards and we're just like, woohoo for everybody. And it's a big enthusiastic party.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fun.
Well, I just wanted to quickly correct myself for anyone listening about the Gary Burton thing. So in 1968, Gary Burton was invited to present Duke Ellington with the Lifetime Achievement Award. And then following that, Stan Getz was supposed to present Album of the Year to the Beatles for Sgt. Pepper's. And Stan didn't show up. So someone backstage said, here, Stan didn't make it. Go back and announce this award too. And that's how Gary Burton gave gave the Beatles their Grammy. But then he says, as of this writing, I'm honored to have received 21 nominations and 7 Grammy Awards spanning 5 decades. That's
Right.
Gary Bird. So, yeah, cool
That's
stuff.
nuts. Yeah. Jeez. Well, we do have one more Facebook question.
Okay.
And it's from Larry Axelrod. And
Larry.
he says, as a player and someone who needs to carry their gear around, can you talk about the pros and cons of composers asking for odd instruments or devices, cool sounds or effects versus performance, touring, carrying, nightmare?
Yeah. Right. So, okay. Yeah, we can talk too long about this one. So,
right.
Okay. Commissioning contracts. When we commission music, now existing music, we decide sometimes whether to play or in what context to play it, depending on the instrumentation. I feel like that's reasonable. But in our commissioning contracts, when we are having work created, I have stipulations. I don't permit timpani. I don't, and then in touring situations, if they want to write for chimes or an array of taigongs or I can't remember what other language in there, but there's some stipulations, and mostly it's just to grease the conversation so the composer understands early on that they need to talk to me before they write stuff. But the language states that in certain instances, the composer will be responsible for the rental fee for the gear needed for performances should we program in different places, and that gets people's attention, and we get into the weeds of what that really means. And then once the conversation starts, sometimes where that's a concern is like it's not just performance; you have to prepare and practice the thing too, right? So I don't own a set of 4 timpani. I have a lovely inventory that has served me over the years, but I don't use timpani enough to justify owning a set. I love timpani. I have nothing against them, but in my weird little multi-percussive niche, I don't have enough use for them to buy them and maintain them and so forth. So if a piece comes around that requires timpani, then in the budget for that project, we have to include timpani rental somewhere. And some composers want something badly enough that they will provide it, and others rethink their plans based on logistical realities. But what I know what they want early in the process, in a much more positive light, there are often a lot of creative solutions to accomplish what the gesture that they want to write for is. Or, oh, it turns out you didn't want a whole set of chimes, you just want a couple of chimes. Well, actually, the chimes you're asking for, I can wrap and pack in a hard ski case and travel with me to gigs. So that's actually not going to be a problem. I'm glad we didn't rent a whole set of chimes when I can just bring the pitches we need. Examples like that. So let's see here. Over time, many years, over 2 decades now, I have purchased instruments here and there, as we all do, and slowly have accrued an inventory that's pretty robust. And I can accommodate more requests now than I could earlier on. But I also, it is very important to me when we commission work that material gets other performances. I don't want it to be performed by us and then just disappear. That's not, I don't know. It just, we all should maximize the mileage we get out of all of our effort, including composers. And I really try to help guide a part in a direction so that it's reasonable for other players to be able to learn to perform, but also to practice, And so like I said, well, if you do this, these are the obstacles to preparing the piece, and not very many other people are going to get to perform it. So maybe there's a way we could do this so that there'll be a greater chance of future performances, and that usually resonates well in our collaborative conversation. And then as far as checking gear versus renting gear, 8th Blackbird creates, we advance documentation of presenters, and that includes a backline inventory of all the larger things. And I don't know whether it's common sense or experience, but I have a sense of what to request that I know is reasonable for someone to rent or for a percussion studio to be able to provide. And I know what I should bring that is the things that are unreasonable to ask somebody to go out of their way to try to figure out on their end. But we don't travel. I don't travel with fancy blown SKB cases and stuff as much as possible. There's reasons for that. I know how to pack gear so that I don't have problems, I guess, and we can get into the minutia of that if you're interested. But also, when I'm traveling, if you're on a regional jet, I'll give you a couple examples. If you're on a regional jet, anything that looks like a professional case, if like, you know how they have weight balance problems sometimes, anything that looks like a professional case, like imagine an SKB bongo case, right? It's the size of a large, like really big toaster. The airline will pull off professional cases before they will inconvenience anyone's personal luggage. So if I put everything in pool suitcases from Target, basically disguising it as personal luggage. And if there's fragile things, I put fragile things inside a box, inside a suitcase. And I've never had a problem. So I don't spend money, with very few exceptions, like crotales, which are very hard to find anything that they fit in well. So that's, I guess, an exception. But for the most part, all I travel with are regular pull suitcases. And then I request a vibraphone and a concert bass drum and a bunch of cymbal stands. And I usually bring my own cymbals and customize hardware, like an aux clamp with a certain kind of extending arm to turn a cymbal stand into something else I need. That stuff I bring.
There's this great quote from Steve Schick about the topic, and he says, "I exclusively play the instruments that are available."
Yeah, whatever's available. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, go ahead.
It sort of reminds me that like visionary is not the same thing as composer. Because I've been in those conversations where someone has these like grand ideas, and it's like there's nothing clever about a vision of like, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have 80 bass drums above the audience, so all concert bass drums, and like
Casey,
a bunch
I
of
want you to
dudes
write
are going
this piece. I want it.
Right. Like it's not hard. It's not hard to come up. Like this would undoubtedly be really cool. Like, okay, we're going to have 80 bass drums. It's going to be great. And then two new bass drums are going to clash together on trapeze cables over the audience. It's going to be awesome. Okay, yeah, I'm the composer. You guys go figure out how to do it.
Oh, like Casey, please write that. It's going to be amazing. I'll buy the first copy.
Was that just off the cuff, or that's something you've been thinking about for a while?
This, yeah.
No, here, I'll come up with another one. Okay, so there's a 80-foot thunder sheet that sits above the audience, and you get 80 kittens to walk on it, and they make sound, and oh great, I'm a genius. Go figure it out.
No, you should rent pigeons to fly into it.
There you go.
Rent the pigeons.
No, see, it's not hard. It's not hard to come up with amazing visions. It's really hard to like do something practical that would work.
Yeah. Casey, you own that thunder sheet. You own the pigeons. You can rent it all out. It's great. Moneymaker, man. I'm there, man.
Carly, put an end to this. I'm putting in the first motion to rap. Motion to rap. Second it, Dan.
Motion to talk about Bartok snare throw-offs.
We better end this. Matthew, thank you so much. I feel like we could talk for another couple of hours on all of your projects and everything that's going on with you, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been great.
Thanks for the invite. I had a blast. See you around.
All right. Yeah, see you next time.